Okay, we are good to go.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's an enormous pleasure to have the ability to run this podcast today together with two fantastic experts, Goran Buldioski from Hertie School in Berlin and Wojciech Przybylski, editor-in-chief of Visegrad Insight and a person with an extensive knowledge about the existing challenges in Central and Eastern Europe. We will be talking today about enlargement, and our conversation is around is related to the organization and the implementation of a project which we run together, and the project was won by the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities in Macedonia from the Visegrad Fund. It allowed us to come together to another event that is related to the implementation of this project. And as the project is devoted to the questions related to information and disinformation, the questions related to the perspective of enlargement. Today's conversation is going to be about these issues, but what we are going to do is we are going to do two things. The first one is we know the context. We know that when we look at the question of enlargement from the perspective of the Balkans, and in particular from the perspective of Skopje, we know that Bulgaria is bad, that the EU doesn't want enlargement, and that there is and what is ongoing is actually a struggle for national survival and identity. However, we also know that beyond this narrative, there is a de facto abandonment of the enlargement perspective, and there is a stalemate that doesn't allow the idea of enlargement to become part and to be part of the public discourse beyond the perspective of a struggle for national identity. Therefore, our discussion today is not going to be about either Bulgaria nor national identity, nor whether the EU want or doesn't want enlargement, but what is the current political context, how the element of enlargement fits into the contemporary challenges, both to the European Union, and because we also have Wojciech Przybylski with us, what are the costs of not being member of the EU? So on that short note, I want to pass the floor with the first question going to Goran on the question about how the current political trends in the European Union will impact the future infrastructure and power distribution, both in the EU, but also, since this question touches upon these current political trends, we apparently need to look wider, also beyond the EU. What happens currently in the international relations, how it impacts the further development of the integration process. Goran.
Thank you, Spasimir. Thank you for having me on this podcast, and thank you for not asking me to talk about Bulgaria and Macedonia issue, because speaking about the world seems easier. And of course, I say this with a bit of a joke in that, given what's happening in the world. So let me, it's a complex question. I'll try to sort of break it into three talking points in a rather telegraphic fashion. So. First, the major context is a world that we all see that is no longer the world that we knew when the EU integration in a way started its biggest swing. We're talking about 1992 with the three countries, 2004, 2007. Second, in this point, in this world, EU is actually fighting for its own relevance with no single direction to go. And it's fighting at all fronts at once: security, economic business model, monetary, financial world, and also in the digital space. And these are very complex issues that such a podcast will be too short to elaborate. Let me just say how does it affect sort of everything what the EU does, including the EU integration. First, to drive the narrative, we have to see where those narratives are contextualized inside the European Union. And I have to say, coming from the region, but being in Berlin and before that many years in Hungary, it pains me to conclude that EU suffers from two things. One is a small continent mentality in the way how it presents and how it operates in the world at the global stage. But also many EU member states suffer from small country mentality in the internal debates about the future of the EU. These are the things that actually very much are linked to the past. And I would say, if I try to think in a positive frame, I would say the positive mindset should be about the future. But we in Europe, we discuss very rarely about the future. We're so much into the past, including the EU accession, where all the references are the past, not so much about the future. And I think the one thing also psychologically, mentally, politically we have to do is break that obsession with our past. The second thing is that the world in 2026 is all about power, which means that the politics in Europe that for a so long time has been about justice or perfecting justice, and in this read the rule of law, nothing bad, excellent politics. But in today's world of power, politics is more about cruelty. And that means a very profound shift also in the minds of politicians. Last but not least, we live in time where narratives do not win wars and political conflicts. Actually, investments in economic, political, societal, military measures does. And then when you look at what's happening inside the EU, Ukraine gives you a very interesting example. Germany, Poland, United Kingdom, Nordics, Baltics put their money where their mouth is. But when you look at Spain, France, Italy, it's all about narrative, nothing of a serious financial or military commitment. If you want to have a union response, that's not possible. Let me go with the second point. There's been so much of, in my opinion, wasteful debate about the EU reform and the accession debate, or how you connect these two, and the EU accession is not possible without EU reform or not. I personally find this very artificial connection. Why? Because even if there was no EU accession, EU governance system was ripe for reforms, and those reforms would have been difficult on its own. And in this way, I also would like to say that I do not see a key obstacle, although the total pain, countries like Hungary, increasingly Slovakia, a number of small countries. But I think the key obstacle in these EU reforms is actually, understanding and a direction by the big member states and agreeing where do they go and agreeing on this reform. And last but not least, in this context, I have to say, much closer to the EU integration, I think we have to go back to the basics. In the debate on EU integration, often we focused a lot about the how. And if you look at the latest accession wave from 2004 to 2014, the how was really, the narrative was clear: returning to Europe, looking back at economic development for Eastern Europe, and so on and so forth. But if we look today, I would say the key question to ask about the EU accession is what problem does the current EU integration efforts are trying to solve? And that brings us not to the how to, but to the why. And a very quick browsing through this tells us that this is about everything and nothing. It's about security and defense. Of course, about Ukraine is always about security, but how much and what exactly? And is it the EU the right answer? Is it about economic development? It is, But also it's not, because the benefits of the expansion bear Ukraine. I mean, if I think about the Western Balkans, 40 EU member states will be minuscule compared to the benefits of the previous enlargement. Is it about geopolitics? Of course it is. But what does it mean? What are the goals towards China? What are the goals towards Russia? Or is it none of the above? And is it about projecting power? And for that, for example, would be interesting to look at the policy that Budapest has been peddling for quite a while. We all watch the policy towards Ukraine because it's visible, it's brutal, it's public, but under the radar goes their very clear policy towards the Western Balkan, in which for them EU accession is none of the above. So I stop here. I hope I provided you layered things in the complex world of Europe today, against which we have to solve the EU accession conundrum.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Goran, for this, on one hand, introductory, on the other hand, very, I would say, thought-provoking remarks, because actually, probably on every single point we can set up a separate podcast. And I hope that we will return to some of these issues, but I will start from where you ended, a little bit maybe twisting the conversation, but you touched upon at the end about an issue that on one hand is important for the process of European integration, and on the other hand, I think in one way or another it radiates also on the Balkans. And it is the question related to actually the position of the EU and its challenges related to functioning, stemming from the fact that if we consider the EU as a unified actor, which I think is a far-reaching simplification, but even if we tend to consider it as a player against others, then it has its internal specifics. And one of its specifics is that beyond the veto power of the member states, we see the current challenges of countries being able to set obstacles when there is a need for unity. And such is the example of Hungary at this point. Hungary's approach, however, is also strongly embraced in Belgrade, and some argue that it also spreads even further to the political elites in Skopje. So my question to Wojciech is how to handle this challenge for the European Union when it comes to these internal obstacles that appear that are on the road to its efficiency.
Thank you very much, and also thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to have this exchange with great colleagues, and hopefully there is interest in what we have to say. I will very briefly just touch upon things, so to anchor my answer in also what Goran had to say. And I have two add-ons. Maybe we can continue later on this exchange. One is that the world has always been about power. But there are many facades of power, in many ways, how this power competition between states and political organizations taking shape. In the recent chapter of the world history, we definitely are in the hard power, not just competition, but confrontation. But it is also multifaceted, because it is at the same time underlined by a very aggressive economic security competition, or economic war, if you want to say, that is below a threshold of a real military exchange, kinetic exchange that we see now in a number of places. And in any case, if there isn't a hot war, there is always a competition on the most rudimentary level for the hearts and minds of societies, that in democratic societies at least makes sense. In autocratic societies, it's simply easier and cheaper because these societies are much more manipulated and controlled by the autocrats. But in democratic societies, the struggle of power is the power of ideas, sometimes called soft power, sometimes called whatever other kind of, basically discursive power. It's a question of societal will, societal wants, the morals, so to say. And I find it fascinating because I think we are facing, as I say, this is a multifaceted competition, and Europe is part of several of those layers. Unfortunately, it is not there. And here I think we agree with Goran definitely that on a number of issues there we hear quite a lot of slogans, but not strategy. Quite often, I mean, we're not so serious, and I mean on both sides, of those who are in the process of enlargement and on those who are the institutions that set the conditions for, or the conditions for enlargement. I could relate to that later, but the second point in this is also that the source of power and the agency that we have in Europe is stemming from somewhere which is not obvious, which is the economic power, the economic robustness and agility, especially in Central Eastern Europe, the countries that have joined not so long ago, is a testimony to why you need enlargement in the first place and why it is needed by the rest of Europe to continue growth. Without growth, you don't have legitimacy on the societal democratic end, and you don't have the toolkit and the ability to grow the military power, the hard power that is necessary, hopefully just for defense, but it's simply a fact of life that it's necessary to be there. So the most noble of all is to grow the potential, the economic potential, without using the coercive element in that. And enlargement in this game is, I think, it's a fantastic toolkit, and has been a fantastic toolkit, because it serves two purposes. One, for those who truly want peace in Europe, it is the process of achieving a lasting peace. Those who are not in European Union as a project, they are not part of the biggest peace project probably in the world, and definitely in the history of our continent. So by putting yourself outside of the European project, you're putting yourself at risk in a world that we are just discussing is entering a hot phase of a hard power competition. And it's putting your societies, and you're essentially, as a political leader, you're putting your own personal risk at stake. So I think we should treat in all seriousness enlargement not as necessarily a geopolitical project. I think it is the framing and the phrase itself is not so good, because to my ears, geopolitics is a phrase of the Russian Empire. It's just not what we do in Europe overall, and we shouldn't be doing that. Of course, there are elements of geography that matter for strategy, but geopolitics is the language that justifies aggression, essentially. Enlargement is not an aggression. There is, because of geopolitical mindset of Russia that is being, is basically pronounced on our part of the world, we have certain urgency, but the fundamental part of it is to make the peace process continue, and to make it so that our economies flourish. It's an easy link, and it's definitely not the selling point of the enlargements we have went through in Central Eastern Europe. For societies that went through the enlargement, the selling point was the cash cow. The leaders had, in our countries, including Poland, had very little trust in societal buy-in for the peace message, although they recognized in their policy debates that the EU is a soft security add-on to the hard security of NATO alliance. But in reality, we have sold the enlargement as a cash cow, as a promise of unfinished funds, and unfortunately, that had a spillover effect, and it is being treated by a number of other countries as a cash cow. We heard Mr. Macron even being irritated at some point that the EU is not a supermarket, meaning a cash cow. And we very well know that some countries have been proficient in exploiting the cash cow, which I'm still marveling the Hungarian method when you contract 110% of allocated funds, knowing that you will not be able to use that much, but you contract even that much from EU money for disbursement, so that you maximize the intake, but the output of that money is not so much to be seen in comparison to other countries. So definitely there are deficiencies of that model of thinking of enlargement through simply economic terms. And I'll reaffirm that this needs to be, in these times especially that we are in, a serious peace project that we're talking about, and also a project that in a number of occasions is about, again, the importance of economy for a higher purpose, that is our, well, you can call it resilience, or you can simply say this is building up a potential to stand on our own feet when we need to produce the more hard power outputs, and we need to produce them on our own, as we know, because the military umbrella we have enjoyed over Europe from the US, it's coming a little bit short, and we will not be able to enjoy. So it's simply time to grow up and take decisions. So that's the context for me, and it hopefully partly answers your question, Spas, on where we are in the process of enlargement. Now, I think, and might be my last point, but feel free just to direct me in another direction with my points, to say that currently, especially from Central Eastern Europe, I think we will be, for very similar reasons as I've just explained, looking at meeting the basic conditions. As much as we want enlargement, we are a pro-enlargement country. But whether we are looking at Ukraine or Moldova or to the Western Balkans, we want, for selfish reasons, equal treatment of our economic actors, who are the foundation of our peace process with the rest of Europe, that they are fairly treated and they are not being subject to coercive or corruption influence of the certain cliques and methods of operation that we have experienced and painfully survived through in the 90s and earlier in the transformation. Now, because we know that, we do not want to accept new members who are not serious about dealing with them. It's not about fully stopping them, but creating a framework and and basically honoring the societal demand that is there in a number of countries. We speak Serbia, we speak Ukraine, for instance. Societies want rule-based, fair competition in order to thrive, in order to build hopefully some prosperity. But again, this is serious not because we want to earn money, but also because we do not want to create conditions for non-peace through the enlargement.
Thank you very much, Wojciech. Thank you. Well, I think we managed to set the framework of our discussion, and also to touch upon numerous issues. I want to pick up on one of what Goran said at the beginning, and then Wojciech touched upon it. This argument, first of all, about the fact that the European Union is a peace project. It is an important point of reference because it is a peace project. It was made for times of peace, but we, as you already pointed out, we no longer have times of peace. So it is one of the challenges that the European Union has to stand to the new reality. And the second argument, which was very interesting, what Goran said about the fact that the EU needs reform regardless of the question of enlargement. Indeed, I absolutely agree that this nexus about enlargement and reform is in itself toxic, and it actually is counterproductive. But I would argue exactly the opposite, Goran, but just for the sake of provocation, if I may use it, that I also think that the EU needs enlargement regardless of reforms. So on that note, my second round of questions would go again first to Goran, but it will be the question, so where do we see the deep problems? Because as I said, I agree, reform is needed. Where do we see these deep problems that require our reaction and attention?
You know, Spasimir, actually, you and I agree quite a lot. And I would not talk in problems. You know, coming from the Balkans, we always about problems. Let's talk about opportunities. And one thing is about actually, when I'm in a bad mood, I like to say, can European Union and its member states embrace hypocrisy and own it? Because actually this has been also happening. And why I'm saying this, I'm saying not because I like it, I actually dislike it profoundly. I really would like to have a principled approach. But in times like this, actually, I think both voters, but also other political actors, appreciate more the honest hypocrite than a dishonest fighter for the rule of law that does not exist. And, you know, we speak this in context of Macedonia, we can speak this in context of countries that have been promised succession or a path, we speak this in context of Ukraine that feels defending Europe and so on. Now, in order to do that, I would like to not only offer a different narrative, I would like to offer a different look at things. Because, you know, if you say that it's a cash cow for European Union, that's true, but that's closing your eyes open. What does it mean? For example, Federico Fubini from Corriere della Sera did a very basic calculation about how much the German economy alone profited in the value of economic migrants from 2009 till 2017. 200 billion in value of the education that people from Eastern and Southern Europe brought to the German economy. Now, I have not this is just the value of education. I know purists among us will say, wait a second, Goran, you cannot count it like that and so on. But look, I have not even mentioned German companies, how many profits, and not only German, Swedish, French, others, how many profits they made, which is good. I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. And how much of other income that is there, but we don't see it. We only see it through the EU budget of who is a net payer and who is a net beneficiary. But I think we have to see that this has been a two-way street. And if you put the money together and if you put the value, these countries, and I live in Germany, Germany did not go for an enlargement because it was not beneficial to them. It was beneficial. And I think we have to say that narrative, that actually we also earned. When I say we, meaning the people who live inside the big EU member states. Yes, some more, some less. The second important point, I mean, we touched upon Orban several times. Actually, I think it's very interesting to see that Orban's model, but I mean, Wojciech spoke at length, and I very much agree with him about that people have to have a buy-in. But what's interesting is that people have to have a buy-in in good democratic societies, but also in authoritarianly led societies like the Hungarian one. And as we can see what's happening now with the Hungarian elections, meaning that there is no alternative business model inside the EU than the EU money. And I think that's good news for the moment. I say it's good news because if you think, or maybe Orban thought a few years ago that the influx of Chinese, Russian, other Gulf money will be sufficient to replace or change the business model, that actually sends a very powerful signal. And to me, that's a signal to Vučić, that's a signal to Mickoski, that's a signal to anybody in the Western Balkans who would like to replicate that model. And I see that also as another opportunity. Last but not least, I actually agree with this geopolitics because it's a term thrown out, and often, especially in the Balkans, I even have a lot of friends in Skopje that I notice without them being aware how much they have a pro-Russian narrative. And it's not their fault. They actually have been really engulfed by influence. But the geopolitics, more often than not, really follows this kind of justification of aggression or justification of raw power. But in our case, when I say our case, it means both Western Balkans, Ukraine, and EU, so meaning the sort of big triangle. And let's not forget Moldova, that's not an unimportant country as well. We also have some fundamental questions, which means, for example, can one Hungary, can one Croatia, can one Austria or Italy be comfortable with having a military base in Novi Sad or Banja Luka? I'm not saying that tomorrow Republika Srpska or Serbia wants to have a military base. For many reasons, they actually don't want to have it. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But I think there are also questions of both security and economic development that to some extent also the EU member states have to answer for themselves, and then also discover whether their stake maybe is higher than what we think it is. And I think we learned that the hard way through Ukraine, but I don't think that the exercise has been completed. And this is where I compliment Wojciech in what he was saying about the economy, because actually a lot of these things are done with a very transactionalist, neoliberal market economic mind, which for the current moment is not, it doesn't work. Not only doesn't work, but actually it's counterproductive, because we will not talking about making the highest profit. We will be talking about securing materials, securing supply chains for some profit, but also stability of it, rather than maximum profit and instability as we see that. And I don't want to even open the Pandora's box of what the conversations about energy are in Europe, because just look out of the window, Spasimir, wherever you are. We don't use enough the sun, we don't use enough the wind, and then we are depending on oil and gas producers around the world. While the most logical thing, even to a person who is not a political or economic scientist or a big businessman and whatnot, is that if you depend on that, you are at the moment and in a midterm to long term in a losing game. So to me, these are only some of the parameters in which we have to really rethink the EU accession, and also look at that with a bit of a positive two-directional, as a positive two-directional street, because I think in spite of all the difficulties, the opportunities outweigh the troubles. And that also is very clear because we have not heard a killer argument for non-integration. The non-integration is keeping the status quo and sort of daily management. And to me, that's also a very interesting thing, because I believe that the opponents to integration should have come up by now with a killer argument. Maybe I've missed it. I haven't heard it. So I will really look this more in the frame of opportunities rather than problems, because I do believe that this could be overcome. But hopefully we can discuss about some practical steps later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Goran. And now back to Wojciech. Based on what was being said and what Goran further developed, Goran talked about opportunities, and Wojciech, as I mentioned from the outset, the question towards you is, what are the costs of non-membership? So what are the implications? So what do we need to pay attention when we think about the endurance of this, I would say, stalemate situation in which we find the countries that are in the waiting room for accession?
Well, there are costs on both sides. So there are costs both to the Union, the European Union as a project, and there are costs for the countries themselves. If we're serious about the recognition of that we are yet in another Cold War essentially situation in which the big competitors, being US and China, are not leaving much vacuum. And the European Union has ambition. It is not going to catch up to any of these big ones, but it allows, by creating a space for smaller countries, for ability of maneuvering and some space. Now, I mean, yes, I'm talking big ideas, but it also has practical consequences. It allows for those who are small countries, of course, to increase their ability to maneuver. I'll put it this way. For Poland, joining the EU was one of the ways to mitigate the risks of aggressive German position towards Poland of the past. And I mean both ruthless capitalism as much as certain ruthless political decisions that we have experienced in the past. So you are entering in a process in which, even though you're smaller, we're still smaller, much more smaller than Germany by half in terms of population, in terms of GDP, not to mention wealth accumulated, and administrative potential, which is also hardly ever compared, but much smaller in Poland than in Germany. We are a much weaker actor. We deliver a lot that Germany does not in terms of defense posture and so on, but that in time, we'll see how it goes. It's simply to say that we need to somehow mitigate the risk of actors that historically are challengers to us. And that's the perspective of countries who are joining, in order not to look behind their back while looking to the future, to the markets in Europe, to the markets beyond Europe. There are also, there are more and more for developed countries like Poland. We're looking beyond what is currently building our prosperity. And prosperity of Poland is nearly 90% built in Europe. But we're already looking beyond, and where we can continue the growth by looking beyond Europe. But in order to do that, you need to have a solid foundation and backing. Smaller countries than Poland, like Czech Republic, Slovakia, a number of others, the Baltics, they were looking outside already. I mean, they are very EU dependent, but they are looking even beyond, because their nature is, economically speaking, to be open economies. And again, they need this institutional backing. So what you're missing is an aggressively changing economic model, when the model of economic success described both by Chinese successful companies and described by successful American companies. I mean, I'm listening to Peter Thiel mostly, but not only, is how to achieve a monopoly. Monopolies are achieving success in today's world. And if you want to achieve a monopoly, you're going to exploit any smaller market, unless this market is, expanding bigger and by expansion, enabling itself to be somehow better protected against monopolistic practices of different sorts. That's the perspective of non-enlargement for these countries. Now, in our report that you mentioned so kindly from 2 years ago, we extrapolated 2 paths of non-enlargement. One, you can imagine that there is a decision not to enlarge. And I would call it a better decision than accidental non-enlargement. Because currently we are on a path of a potential accidental non-enlargement. There are big promises, again, big statements, big slogans. Marta Kos is going around saying Ukraine will join by 2030, for instance, right? I mean, okay. No, actually, I heard her in Kiev last year when I was in February in Kiev. She said to Ukrainians, but in front of many European stakeholders, that by the end of her term in the Commission, so 2029, Ukraine will join. So there are big political statements being made, promises, and there are a number of other countries that are being promised also progress. And when that is not delivered, of course, I call it accidental non-enlargement, because the disillusionment may come forward is going to be very destructive also domestically, but externally. Now, what the European Union may miss by not enlarging is, on the one hand, the very same thing. I mean, the markets of Western Balkans, for instance, are not that significant, but they are somehow also significant. They're even more significant if you think of who utilizes the vacuum, the space, if you're not securing it in terms of all the economic security toolbox, for instance, that Europe is now discovering or rediscovering, which is making sure that hostile geopolitical actors are not using this space as a backdoor, regardless if these are members of the EU or not. So you have geostrategic costs, economic security costs to either a decision not to enlarge or accidental non-enlargement, failing to deliver on the promises. And these costs are hugely reputational, but reputations and symbols are triggering action. And we know that from a number of occasions. So again, reputational moments when we fail to act, we fail to embrace opportunity, or we fail to deliver on the threat sometimes, have had hard consequences. We had these consequences in Georgia, 2008, after we failed to deliver on the progress of Georgia integration with the West, following from Russians have taken it as an opportunity to invade. I would argue that one of the reasons for the timing for Ukraine war was the failure of withdrawal from Afghanistan. As weak as we have been, especially United States, been seen, Russia has been concluding that this is a very opportune moment to strike, as basically there was no belief that we could stand up against aggression collectively. Fortunately, didn't follow through, but the very act of aggression had at least one additional enabler, which is this. Now, I will stop here by asking this question: can we allow ourselves, Europe, for unintended consequences, unintended consequences of failure to deliver on the promise of enlargement, seen as, again, something that is about peace building? And if we fail on that, who will benefit? Or who will use the opportunity to undermine us even more? I'll stop here.
Thank you, Wojciech. So many questions and points. I think we will have to make a second edition of this podcast because I will just drop an argument within the last round of our talk, and I will actually encourage us to deliver kind of brief answers, because we don't want to extend it too much. But based on what was being said, and I think that we made it quite explicit how important the enlargement is for both for the EU and for the candidate countries, what kind of opportunities it creates, what kind of costs its non-appearance drives, and we also need to acknowledge that this needs to occur in a completely different environment. Previously, I would argue that up until 2014, the enlargement was a kind of a process that was a natural development of the integration process. Now, it is, in a sense, a choice, a very important choice between different models that are struggling for the dominance in the world. And I think that from that perspective, Europe is not on a strong side. This violent environment in which we operate deprived Europe, the European Union, of number of its elements that constitute its soft power and its attractiveness. On the other hand, the enlargement is the raison d'etre for the existence of the EU. Without the enlargement, the process kind of will dry out. As you said, Wojciech, it cannot be simply a process of management. So on that note, and leading us towards concluding remarks, although so many doors were being opened, what should be the lessons for the EU on one hand, but on the other hand, for the Balkans and North Macedonia in particular, when we think about the challenge of enlargement? Goran? And please feel free also to refer to whatever you found interesting and provocative in the previous contributions.
Yeah, no, I will, and I will try to keep it short, and I will finish a bit more on Macedonia, because I know that this is also interesting to people there. So, Spasimir, speaking about the previous enlargement waves, the why was clear. And then the European Union and the member states could have focused on how to, and bureaucratic how to. I think at the moment we're still not very clear about the why. Of course, there were at that time, not everybody was in agreement and whatnot. I don't want to oversell that, wow, everything was plain sailing, and you guys, you come from countries that exceeded the EU, so you know that it was not. But compared to today, it was much clearer, the direction of travel. And that was, with the markets and with the return to Europe. I will pick up on something that Wojciech very importantly said. He used the phrase accidental enlargement or accidental non-enlargement. While we've put a focus on enlargement or non-enlargement, I would put on accidental. Actually, I think it will be much worse to have anything accidental, irrespective of its enlargement or non-enlargement, than purposeful designed enlargement or purposeful non-enlargement, because that means that you will actually see and you will calculate the benefits and the cost of the solution, and you will purposely go to there. I have to admit, when I look at the plans for the budget and what's allocated on EU accession, I understand. I met actually Kos here in Berlin last week. Was a very thing. I understand her position, and actually I support it. But it's also more about doing politics. But the budget stands at 47 billion for the rest and 100 billion for Ukraine. Comparing that only with the 200 billion that Germany profited in education, that's like, really? Is this money? It's not. And that means that it will be accidental, because we are not designing it for it. And to me, that's the whole issue. But, again, people like us can get carried away with all purposeful solutions. Let me start from the reality. I said at the beginning that EU should, in a way, maybe own its own hypocrisy, but it doesn't mean that it should still remain like that. I actually think when it comes for the Balkans, the good signs will be in the domain of politics. While leave Kos and the others to do the bureaucratic enlargement thing, I think for the politicians, but in particularly for the people in the Balkans, it will really help if there are clear political resolutions to some ongoing problems. And here, I do not kid myself that, suddenly overnight we have to resolve, Kosovo-Serbia issue. But for example, get one of the non-recognizers to recognize Kosovo. That will be a cost for a non-recognizing country to show. If that's too big, resolve Prevlaka issue between Croatia and Montenegro with a bit of grace, not like arm twisting between a member and a non-EU member. Not to mention Spasimir, Bulgaria, Macedonia. After all, this has been really blown out of the proportion in what really the problem should be. I mean, there is a fundament, but actually, in the diplomatically, you can move on. You don't need to get stuck. Or having a serious conversation, what Maya Sandu said about the referendum in Moldova to join Romania, which is a big disruptor, or about resolving Transnistria question. Or much smaller on the surface issues, like it pains me to see that MOL was the company that will buy the Naftna Industria Serbia, not a share of it, from the Russians. Where are the other EU companies to be part of what is the future geopolitics of energy or the energy markets in the Balkans? And these are the things that actually would show to both people and politicians that Europe or significant EU member states inside the EU mean business, and they're able to do business. Last but not least on Macedonia, and I will finish on that, I think for the future of Macedonian EU accession, Hungarian elections will matter quite a lot. And same will be, it's interesting that we're saying, like, it's interesting to see that a 9 million country inside European Union punches, as boxers will say, above their weight. But it's amazing to say this. I'm almost like I have to pinch myself, but I really mean it. Because if there is no Orban in Budapest, countries like North Macedonia, but also Serbia, will have to rethink their business model, and they will lose an important supporter for the current balancing model. And I think then we will see a much more bigger commotion. If not, and I don't want to be a doomsayer, the status quo is more likely to process, but I would see a different type of EU integration run by the Orbans, the Le Pens, Kaczynskis, and others of this world. And interestingly enough, they seem to have a much clearer idea than the progressive forces. And that's not a non-accession. That's actually accession, but accession without democracy.
Thank you so much, Goran. Wojciech, last words, and please feel free also to comment on all these matters that you found worth emphasizing. Just one last remark: I indeed strongly recommend to take a look at what is available on Visegrad Insight website as a report on the costs of non-enlargement, because that's what Wojciech referred to, and it's also something that allows to get a very interesting intellectual exercise on different scenarios that are ahead of us. So, Wojciech.
Thanks, Spas. I agree with Goran on the importance of Hungarian elections, also because there is simultaneously there are many scenarios at play. It's not just an enlargement scenario, right? I mean, this is also China dependency scenario as a model for Europe. There is a defense dependency scenario, same for related to US, and all of that, as you rightly pointed out, is also an internal domestic model for Europe that has been penned down actually by Hungarian, essentially officers under Hungarian government, on the Hungarian government payroll, and Balázs Orbán's direction under the so-called Great Reset. And it's not just a conversational coffee talk that they are proposing, but a proposal that frames debates about the future of EU. Because enlargement, I think, and that would be, if you want to, these are going to be my last words. Enlargement is not enlargement as itself. I mean, it's not a contract between the two, the EU, and actually not the two, but all of EU countries and the new country. It's a foundational act. It's a moment of constitutional change of what the European Union is. And we need to keep repeating this exercise, because that's the apparently only way how we can innovate. We can innovate our institutions. We can innovate by pushing further the train to which we attach another wagon. That is simply the process. This is the procedure. That through interstate member negotiations, you set up the next stage of integration. You remodel what has not been working, hopefully to a better solution that ameliorate the things that needs to be adapting to a fastly changing world. That's why we need enlargement also. I mean, it's internally needed for the EU. The other version is that we don't have enlargement, and we indeed are at risk of having elections even next year, 2017, two important elections in France and then in Poland, allowing for a takeover of the reins in a very currently intergovernmental format of the EU decision-making by potential hostile actors to the very idea of using the EU potential to insulate Europeans and our nations from the really unpleasant things in the world. Because the proposals on the table, if someone wants to read them, are about introducing only the market and getting rid of all the institutional bullshit. Which means, again, no insulation internally of smaller actors against the interests of bigger actors and stronger actors. So this is basically, shooting ourselves in the feet and saying we will be happy about it. So that's the nature of this proposal, and it is as much important. And yes, I think they're talking a lot about getting new countries on board. But at the same time, we see that they can talk about it safely in Hungary because they think, in Hungary, Mr. Orban thinks that he can safely advocate for enlargement for the Western Balkans because this is not going to happen. And when he sees that all enlargement might be happening with Ukraine, which by all means is not as not matching many of the things that Western Balkans have achieved over the years, but it has the stamina and direction towards meeting the criteria, and he sees a real danger in that, and he says, no, this is not happening. So I don't think that in the end, Mr. Orban is such a big friend of enlargement. It's more of a talking point.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wojciech. Indeed, I mean, if there is anything that we observe at this point is that as long as we talk the talk, there is absolutely no advancement, despite all the efforts that were being made and all the rhetoric related to geopolitics, related to new environment and new challenges and new hopes. When it comes to the practical moving ahead, we have the impression that we are in the same spot. This is a challenge both for the EU and both for the candidate countries. And I silently hope that our conversation was just a small piece of sand in the sandbox of the European Union to contribute to this debate and to spark a reflection on the purposes of membership and the advantages of it way beyond the daily narratives that we hear both in Macedonia and in Hungary and in various other countries where the unwillingness to see the advantages of the EU kind of overshadows the benefits of the integration process. So on that note, I would like to thank you very much both for your time and for this very inspiring discussion. And I look forward, as I said, hopefully to a next edition in any possible format. So thank you very much and have a nice day.
Thank you, Spas.